All right, this is really a wild story when you think about it across the sports landscape. Everybody remembers where they were when Luka Doncic got traded, right? It was like the middle of the night. You look at your phone and you go, "What? That can't be right." To the point where Shams, who broke the news, had to say, "Yes, this is real." Sources tell ESPN full trade, Lakers, Luka Doncic, et cetera, Anthony Davis going back to the Mavericks. And you can see that tweet has, or that X post has 32.8 million views. 32.8 million views because it's one of the more, I guess, memorable sports stories ever. you know, one of the probably the most significant trade I can ever recall, the most shocking trade I can ever recall in sports. In fact, that was a very busy 24 hours or so because the next morning it was announced that the Indiana Fever signed Dewana Bonner, which I covered as well. Of course, that didn't really work out so well, nor has this trade for the Dallas Mavericks. But what's really interesting about it is that the Mavericks have now fired Nico Harrison, the GM behind the deal. Nico Harrison has sort of become the figure face for this. He was the one who executed the trade. But to me, I don't want to say it's shocking that Nico Harrison got fired, of course, because you make a move like this. You can't ever say it's going to be shocking. It was basically inevitable after Luka Doncic was traded. But it's shocking in the sense of how does this chain of events happen this way, right? There you go, Nico. See you later. A lot of fans in Dallas probably happy about it. How does a sequence, a chain of events happen that way where he's allowed to execute that trade and then gets fired shortly thereafter with the next season? How is that possible? That's incompetence at its essence, at the top of the food chain. And the Mavericks are no longer owned by Mark Cuban, right? If it was Mark Cuban, he would have to answer for this. He doesn't have to answer for this. Now they're owned by the Adelson and Dumont families, who will hide behind some sort of statement, and whoever the next GM that comes in is. But it's just a wild scenario because if you make that kind of move, that's the kind of move you should be making with job security. You should not be trading Luka Doncic without job security. And instead, not only do they trade Luka Doncic, they wind up getting the number one pick in the draft. The Mavericks do. They land Cooper Flagg, and Kyrie Irving is hurt. So what kind of message does that send from the top of the food chain because look, I know he's the GM and they could say, it was within his powers and we don't micromanage and we don't do stuff like that. But how could a trade of Doncic be signed off on? And one of your top players is injured. And you get the number one pick in the draft who's supposed to have time to develop. And then you fire the GM. What does that say? I mean, it makes the Doncic trade look even more disastrous in retrospect. I mean, it was so disastrous, people were saying it was rigged to give the Lakers a new life. And the Mavericks right now sit at the bottom of the standings in the NBA, basically. In the Western Conference, only the Pelicans are below them. The Mavericks are 3-8. So things have not been going well for Dallas. Anthony Davis is a good player, but he's not the front of a franchise. He's not the top of a franchise. And, he's game to game right now with an injury as well, which is something you've grown accustomed to with AD. I mean, he is averaging 21 points and 10 boards. It's not like AD has been the problem there, but Kyrie's not there. And then, of course, Luka Doncic is over in LA, and all of a sudden, you're seeing what the Lakers are doing. And the Lakers are successful to 8-3 without LeBron James playing this year. Luka's had some monster games out the bat. He's averaging 37 points a game and 9.5 rebounds and 9 assists. Those are legendary numbers. Luka Doncic is putting up legendary numbers, which is being rubbed in their faces from the most prominent franchise in the league. The Los Angeles Lakers back on. How do the Lakers keep doing it? That's what it feels like for people, right? That's what it must feel like for all fans who see that and like, how did they do it again? How did they go from, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar to Magic Johnson to Shaq and Kobe to LeBron James to now Luka Doncic? It has to be rigged. And that's how unbelievable and wild the trade seemed at the time. because there's never been a trade in my lifetime. I've been doing this a long time. I mean, it's why I'm compelled to do this video right now. I have never seen a trade that caught my attention like that. That made me go, holy, that really happened? No way that's real. It's got to be parody. It's got to be Centel, right? It's got to be one of those things. But no, it was a real life trade. But then if you're going to allow the guy to make that trade, you have to then allow him to see it to fruition, or else the whole process looks ridiculous. Or else you nix the trade if you're the ownership. And we've seen Mark Cuban come out and say he wouldn't, sign off on a Luka Doncic trade. And, in a previous era, Mark Cuban was the, figurehead of owners in a sense of being the most public facing, the most loud, the most outspoken. And now, unfortunately for Nico Harrison, the finger pointing will always be in his direction. And I'm not saying he's, he let Rob Pelinka fleece him or whatever happened there, whatever the shenanigans that took place behind the scenes that allowed such a trade to actually go through. But the ownership isn't going to get the finger pointed at them. They're not going to be the one that are dragged through the mud publicly. And he has now become, I would say, the most infamous general manager of all time. Right? I mean, right up there, because you're going to know forever who made the Luka Doncic trade. The guy who made the Luka Doncic trade is Nico Harrison for the rest of time. And here's, Shams to bring it full circle about him getting fired, because I started with the Luka post. The Mavericks are firing Harrison 9 months after the jarring and stunning Luka Doncic trade, a move for which Dumont took accountability and is accepted as a mistake in a courtside interaction with a fan on Monday night. So Dumont, they accepted it as a mistake. Trading Luka Doncic. Think about that. Not something small, not a role player, a generational star. I know the word generational gets thrown around a lot, but for real, the guy who should be Dirk is a legend, no question, but had a chance to be, one of the definitive faces of the franchise, if not the definitive face of the franchise, a Hall of Famer shoe-in as long as he stays healthy, a guy who can take you to championships, a guy who can energize a fan base. And no offense to Cooper Flagg, who, if you're a Mavericks fan, that's the solace, but most people don't turn out to be Luka Doncic. It is very rare that you land a Luka Doncic. You don't trade a Luka Doncic. And then if you're going to allow a guy to trade a Luka Doncic and you fire him with less than a year later, you look like idiots. The whole thing is an absolute mess and a complete disaster for the Dallas Mavericks. I don't know if I've ever seen anything like it.